Before you read this book, I want you to understand something. All of my books are not creations of pure fiction. These are stories from my own life mixed in with my imagination. Joshua.
I need this.
That's my laurel from my Coriolanus-themed birthday.
I need this. Go on.
Many of the things told in these stories reflect on who I really was, what really happened, and what was going on in my mind. This book is simply myself, who I was both good and bad during the time the story takes place. As you read, I'll leave it up to you to decide what events really happened and what is a product of creativity. Welcome to the English Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew.
And I'm Daniel.
And we have yet another amazing novel-length work submitted to us for critique. This one is called Reaper's Creek by a new member of the English Club named Onision.
And this might be our first celebrity member.
Lanny Sarum was close. This guy, he's been in the public eye for a while now. Surely you've seen some of his videos on YouTube. We're really excited to have him on with his book.
The third of 3 books that he's penned.
Right. There is something of a spiritual trilogy, and we're starting at the last one. In the author's note, you do say, Onision, that this one represents you. The first one represents your positives, your second one is your negative, but this is the full extent of who you are as a person.
This is kind of like the Pokémon Platinum of the trilogy. It's the best of both, and like kind of the most complete one.
Right. As the Pokémon Emerald of this trilogy, we thought this would be a good place to start, and we're really excited to dive into this. Your book definitely made me laugh. It made me cry. It made me think about the place that we have in our universe and the extents of human morality.
I'm glad it gave you emotions, because I mostly just kind of felt numb. It was an effective anesthetic.
So without further ado, let's dive right into a summary of Reaper's Creek by Onision. So, I know this might be hard for us to do, but we need to come up with a summary of what happens in this book.
Okay, this book, it actually defies summary, though, because, like, the first third of it is just him being in elementary school, and, like, occasionally someone will die.
Right, so our main character, his name is Daniel.
Yes.
And he is a troubled young boy from a broken household. And at the start of the book, he's living with his stepfather, who he calls Papa, and his 2 sisters. One, like, mildly bullies him in, like, a sibling kind of way, and the other one was mentioned once and never comes up again.
She's mentioned a second time, but she has no dialogue.
The beginning scene, he's talking to his Papa, and he doesn't want to help him with his building thing, because Papa seems to be pretty handy, and he goes to the creek in his backyard, and this is like where he feels the most comfortable. Suddenly he sees the face of his bully and he passes out.
Yes. So he's bouncing back and forth between Ohio, where some part of his family lives, and another location that I don't think is ever explicitly named, but it's not Ohio, because he mentions going back to Ohio.
No, Washington State. He's in Washington State.
Okay, it's Washington State. So he's bouncing back and forth between Ohio and Washington State, I guess. And throughout his childhood, he has these recurring nightmares where aliens are experimenting on him.
Right.
But they also seem to have effects that carry over into the real world. And he slowly starts to gain powers.
There's this interesting moment. So the aliens are kind of described kind of reptilianly. And then on the first day of his, like, 4th grade class, his teacher shows a video about dinosaurs, and then out of nowhere the video's like, what if there were dinosaur human hybrids? And it just so happens to look like the aliens that have been in his nightmare, and it triggers this weird panic attack in him.
It seems like it's a hallucination. It's like written like a dream sequence almost, but then later it's revealed that other students also complained to the teacher about, like, the bizarre nature of this video. And so apparently it was totally real.
Right.
And I guess it's meant to imply that the aliens are dinosaur-human hybrids.
So we get by his own admission that Daniel has a little bit of a hero complex. You know, he always wants to stick up for bullied people, and he always wants to hang out with the outsiders. And he has this bully, the same one that he sees in, like, his vision when he first falls unconscious. And he stands up to him, and then all of a sudden, the bully winds up dead in the very creek that he was playing in the beginning of the story.
Yes, but it's not related, and it's a week later.
Right, he's sledding down the hill into the stream and ends up drowning.
Yeah. And we don't see this happen, we hear about it from a third party.
Right.
And then that's kind of the end of it.
But, you know, this tragedy drives a wedge into his relationship with, one, his best friend, David. And David is so weird. All David wants to do is know a woman carnally. He also likes to lick his hand before he gives people high fives.
Yeah, he's like a Pokemon rival.
Yeah, yeah.
He's like very Gary Oak, but like a pervert. And he tries to sexually assault a minor female character at a sleepover early in the book.
Yes.
And when he tries to do this and fails, everybody in the room is just kind of like, "Oh, Daniel, you scamp," and then they move on. This is all honestly kind of a minor point, though, because a lot of this setup in, like, the childhood section doesn't really matter. Except for the disabled kid.
For the one kid in the special education class who it appears as though the aliens are using as an avatar to communicate with him. You know, Daniel is having these nightmares about being experimented on, and the kid insists that they are trying to help him.
Yep.
But obviously, you know, Daniel doesn't want anything to do with it.
And the special ed kid has some kind of tick that matches, like, a blinking pattern that the aliens have, or something like that.
Something like that.
That's how he first figures out that there's a connection between the two, which seems problematic to just assume that.
So Daniel goes to visit his biological father in Washington State on some sort of church retreat, where it's mentioned very, very flippantly that his father is abusive.
But only to the female members of the family, because Daniel gets along with him just fine, and Daniel's kind of like, I don't see what the big issue is.
Right, where he meets this girl, Julia, who is 3 years older than him.
And he's 11 or 12 at the time.
He's a child. He's a child, and she's not. She's like 18.
She's 15, I think.
Okay. So she's way older than him, and displays clear sexual interest in him. And then they have finally a moment where they make love. And then on the plane ride back home, a stewardess says, "Why didn't you impregnate Julia?"
He goes kind of crazy, and then he also sees the special ed kid on the same flight.
On the same plane! He's on the plane with them!
Who he then
murders.
Stabbed in the neck with a fork.
Right.
Realizing only too late that the special ed kid was in fact an alien. However, he was trying to protect Daniel from a separate race.
Right, he was one of the good ones.
Of evil aliens. Or maybe it's the same race, but he's a good one of the evil aliens. See, there's definitely multiple races of aliens in this book. Like, I think at least 3, but some of them aren't physically described, and it's often confusing, like, which one we're interacting with at any given time.
Right. So, all of this culminates in Daniel realizing that by experimenting on him, he has powers that are beyond human understanding. He then uses these powers to take revenge on the alien race and commits genocide in exactly 14 hours and 7 minutes on their planet.
He's like weirdly picky about how long it took him to commit genocide, which is a word that he himself uses to describe what he's doing.
Right.
And then there's a throwaway line not long after about, like, man, it sure is regrettable that I had to kill all those women and children as well.
Yes. He drowns people in their bathtubs, kills them in the bathroom, all this stuff. He uses his godlike powers then to rewrite the code of the universe. He makes it so that parents always know where their child is and vice versa. He gives vaginas teeth.
So that women can't be assaulted.
Which
is something that he brings up a lot.
Being
assaulted.
And I think he just generally dulls the aggression of the human race and basically bends the universe to his will.
Pretty much.
But at a certain point, he realizes that this isn't real life.
Because everyone's too nice to him and it makes him uncomfortable.
Right, and he reverses this right when he got 2 large-breasted teachers and his old best friend who hasn't talked to him since the death of that bully, to realize that they had been kind of manipulated. And all he has left, basically, is his little girlfriend, Julia.
Sometimes referred to as Julie.
Julia, short for Julia, makes sense to me.
Everyone knows that E is a shorter vowel than A.
So he gives Julia, his powers.
It's like equivalent powers, but a little weaker. I guess just because.
Right, and then this is where it gets really nebulous because he talks about how he's doing things beyond the comprehension of humankind.
There's a lot of chapters where, nothing really seems to happen. He's just describing changes that he made in the world, and then, he and Julia will have sex.
Right.
And at this point, Julia is 18 and he is 15 because there's been a time skip. So, that's a thing. But that will soon be undone because one of the next changes that he makes is making himself a blonde, ripped, blue-eyed, 20-something-year-old so that Julia can then make a joke about, oh, now you're too old for me, tee-hee. And it's very comfortable.
At some point, he realizes he's made a mistake by murdering this alien race, so he brings them all back to perfect health and life, and at one point, Julia gets assassinated, and he brings her back to life, too. So the concept of death and finality are very nebulous at this point.
Yep.
And to that point, he starts to realize that there are things fundamentally wrong with the universe itself. And he uses this to kill God.
Yes. Well, I think we need to back it up because one of the things he realizes is that although he can recode the universe, he can't undo things that have already happened. So this is where the Reaper's Creek comes back because he goes to the creek, finds that there's a bunch of dead women buried under it, finds the man who is responsible single-handedly for all of their killings, goes to his house and kills him.
Kills him and all of his friends, and then there's one that was just kind of forced into helping him. So he was okay. Wait, no. He was described as this gargantuanly, grotesquely corpulent man.
Yeah.
And then he was okay, wait, no, he was just forced to do this by this evil guy. He was really just he was threatened. His wife was threatened, and then so he mercy kills him, and then his spirit he specifically describes is thinner than his physical body, and he's reunited with his wife in the afterlife.
That's all just 2 throwaway chapters that don't really contribute to the rest of the arc of the story.
Because he splits his consciousness into a separate entity that is only referred to as the body.
Capital T, capital B, the
capital
body.
T, capital B. And he sends the body on a quest to kill God, but it turns out there are 3 pieces of God.
Right, each one has a different power set.
And I'll let you guess where he came up with that one. So he succeeds in doing this, but it turns out God has a father.
And the gods that he killed are the 3 aspects of a being that had a sister. And she was the good god that created the world.
Right.
But then the evil male god assaulted her.
Right.
Took over her creation, corrupted it, and then killed her. So then he goes and find the siblings god's dad named Kull. which is like skull without the S.
Or like the large version of Urgles in Christopher Paolini's Eragon.
I love references to media. So yeah, he goes and meets Cull, who's like this trillions of years old, decrepit guy on a big stone throne. He's kind of like Sothis in Fire Emblem Three Houses. Yeah, he sits on like a big stone throne, and Sothis is old, but she doesn't look old. Anyway, she looks like a child, but she's actually thousands of years old and related to a dragon. Keep that in.
He also kills Death.
Yeah, well, first he turns him into a marble.
Right, but then he gains more experience points, and then he kills Death.
Yeah, by playing Final Fantasy VII.
He plays Final Fantasy VII, and then later Metal Gear Solid, and he talks about what works of art these video games are, and how much he loves them.
So he meets Cull, and Cull has the code that was used to create the good sister god written on the wall.
On the wall, as like a monument to her.
Yeah, and it's like, he wrote code on the... I don't know. So then... I almost said Onision. So anyway, he recreates the sister using this code, because apparently Cull is too old and weak to do it now.
Right.
Then, after creating her, he gives over all of his authority to her so that she can rule the world, and then she just kind of nebulously makes it better?
Right.
And then basically he and Julia have sex in the bookends.
That was probably the worst summary we've ever done.
It's so hard to summarize.
It's so hard. It's so... TLDR, he's in elementary school. He wants to save people. He wants to be a hero. He keeps having nightmares about dinosaur-human hybrids who turn out to be real aliens who push something into his mind that inadvertently gives him powers. He meets this girl who he later turns into a god with his godlike powers. He turns himself into two people who he sends to kill God, or all aspects of God. Then he kills God's father. Then he resurrects God's sister. And then he has sex with his girlfriend. The end.
I don't think he kills God's father. I think Cull's allowed to live.
Cull's allowed to live? I don't care.
I called for Julie to meet me miles outside my destination. She arrived seconds after I did. Julia walked toward me with a concerned expression. She knew who I was. She was already in my mind. I think you might be too old for me now, Daniel, she said with a smirk, observing my new appearance. I laughed and grabbed her by the throat. Light illuminated under my palm and her neck as she dove into my thoughts once more. Julia could feel herself get overtaken by fear. She spoke in my mind. You want me to kill God?
So Joshua, now that we've done our best to summarize this book, which honestly defies summary, I think we both had an English professor that both told us that good literature defies summary. So yeah. If anything, this was a good piece of literature.
By that metric, it succeeds with flying colors, I would say.
So to that point, let's start out with some positives, some things that we liked about Reaper's Creek.
Well, we definitely had our qualms with it, as we'll discuss in a moment, but I think one of the strong points of this book is actually the title. Reaper's Creek is a pretty damn good name, I would say, and Stones to Abigail and This Is Why I Hate You, also good titles. They kind of give you a sense of what it's about, and they grab you because they're different.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like the kind of book that you could easily just slap the main magic artifact of onto the cover as kind of like an image. It kind of defies that sort of oversimplification. And I don't know, like, Reaper's Creek, it raises some questions like, does the Reaper live in the creek? Is the creek called Reaper's Creek? If so, why is it called that?
Questions that are never answered.
It doesn't address any of these questions or answer them. However, when I picked up the book, I was intrigued.
There's definitely something to his titling, even on the level of the chapter. Like, he had black eyes, or...
Yeah, honestly, I think you have a gift for titling on Onision. Like, he had black eyes. That's a great title. Face Down Children. That's a good title.
Like, what does that even mean?
I mean, it doesn't come into play at all,
no.
But I like the words.
Well, face down in the creek, because he's dead.
Oh, because the kid's dead. Right. Well, it's followed up by bodies in the creek, actually. So.
Wait, so then what are the Face Down Children?
I don't know. Shook. Okay, so they're not all. They can't all be zingers, but you know, it's the failures that define the successes. Eyes never opened.
Eyes never opened.
Is that a song lyric? It sounds like a song lyric.
It might be. I don't know.
Your dead girlfriend.
So something that's kind of been relevant to my personal life recently.
Dead girlfriends?
Later on in the book, they're talking about rewriting the code of the universe. And Daniel makes several references to, like, what kind of idiot would write all of this? You know, this code is awful and it's not working right. Like, that is my day job. Like, as someone who codes, it was very realistic and relatable and kind of funny to see on a universal scale how someone could just look at the code of the universe and be like, what idiot thought this was a good idea? And it lended a little bit more of concreteness to the magic system, such as it were. Maybe not quite enough, but it was just enough to kind of understand the very basic sentiment of it.
Yeah, comparing the universe's structure to code is like something. It's a good start.
Mm-hmm.
I wish we had gotten that sooner, because when he first starts rewriting the quote-unquote code, he doesn't refer to it that way. He just talks about, I'm changing things.
He's just like, I am going to make myself fly. Yeah. I imagined myself flying, or I killed everyone in the 5th dimension.
Yep. So I think getting that sense of coding sooner would be helpful, and also maybe like a description of what it looks like, even just in his head when he's coding would be good. But yeah, it's a good start. Another thing that I liked was, I think that there's a very sincere representation of rural poverty in this novel. There's a scene where for breakfast, the only thing that he has to eat is lentils on toast, which is not something that I had ever heard of anyone eating before ever for any meal. And I'm a big lentil fan, so I don't know, it just seems kind of odd. Like,
as a vegan.
Oh, you're gonna out me. Yeah, I don't know, it just seemed kind of... It was strange, but in like a noteworthy way, like in a oh, okay, this seems like something he really experienced kind of way.
Yeah.
It also there's mentions of him having to sleep above the water heater,
which was kind of cozy in a way. Like, you could tell he really liked that, or Onision really misses that time in his life. He was like it was like suspended over the
bed
the
is
laundry room,
hand built by his stepdad. In the laundry room over the water heater, and it's so narrow or so close to the ceiling that he can't sit upright.
Right, but which is so weird and so specific that it has to be true. That has to be autobiographical.
It feels like the setting of like one of those lo-fi study beats videos.
Yes, it does. It really does.
But yeah, no, I think there's like an authentic attempt to represent like what it was like to grow up poor. And I can really appreciate that, because it's one of the few places in the book that really feels real. Yeah. I don't know.
I did like the Bridge to Terabithia vibes that were in the beginning of the book. And I mean, they never were quite developed, but in the beginning you kind of get this idea of his household such as it is, and you know, his stepfather and his livelihood that he has. And it's, I don't know. I mean, you know, you can tell that Daniel, and by process Onision, is this embittered, kind of almost entitled person. But it's a good life. You know, they're humble people, but they seem to be making the best of it. And I found that sweet.
It is sweet in a weird way. You know, there's another scene that promises something interesting that I actually really enjoyed reading early on in the book. His relatives are having a party at their nearby shack, I guess. I mean, they call it a house, but it's implied to be like really small and not well put together. And one of his uncles, I believe it is, tries to force alcohol on him. Yeah. And instead of sticking up for him, all the other adults are like, yeah, Daniel, like, try some alcohol, get drunk. And he's like 11. Right. And it makes him really uncomfortable. And his sister is there, and she's only 2 years older than him. And no one sticks up for him. And it sets up this interesting dynamic that, again, unfortunately isn't developed. But it promises, like, this is a guy who the world is completely against him. Right. To an almost cartoonish degree, but it's one of the few moments where you really feel bad for him. Yeah. And it's a shame that this scene is told almost entirely in summary with no dialogue. Right. And no descriptions of, like, or nothing but descriptions, I should say, of, like, what's happening. Because fully fleshed out, this could be its own chapter. Sure. Like, this whole party where he shows up and he's just trying to, like, get away from his impoverished household, and all that happens is a bunch of adults bully him, a child, and try to peer pressure him like he's at a frat party. Right. Yeah, I feel like that'd be really scarring. You get the sense that
Daniel, and I can only assume Onision too, has so much to rise above in his background, in his upbringing, in his cyclical familial trauma, and he just overshoots it by literally becoming God. But there's so much potential for growth in the beginning.
That's such a good point when you said that he has so much to outgrow. And I think that Onision as the author understands that on some level, because Greg / Daniel does grow in power, but he doesn't change as a person at all. If anything, he becomes more bitter and more entitled.
Right.
And not in like, I'm the author and I'm doing this intentionally to show you what bad people are like kind of way.
Exactly.
More in just a like, this is just how
This is just how it is. Yeah, there's very much a sense of, this is me. If you don't like it, you don't like it.
Yeah. It's like one of those like boomer Marilyn Monroe memes that's like, if you don't like me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best.
If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Yeah. I don't know. So it's almost self-aware, which is kind of infuriating in its own way.
It's this frickin' close to self-aware.
Missed it by a hair, but it's a big hair.
It's like one of those really thick arm hairs.
It's one of those thick arm hairs, for sure. One of the crunchy ones.
One of the crunchy ones. You have crunchy arm hairs?
There's another scene where his mom comes home so late from like her second or third job that she doesn't have time to cook them dinner. Yeah. I thought that was another good instance where like we get to see authentic... I don't know, I felt like this is somebody's authentic life.
Right. And to that point, you know, it kind of... Seeing him being ungrateful about that, too, was at once a positive and a negative. Because I was really mad at Daniel, because I was like, dude, your mom works 2 jobs. Like, I'm sorry that she doesn't have any time to cook you dinner. Just get over it and be happy that you have a mother. Yeah. But you know, at the same time, a kid in elementary school who doesn't know any better would be ungrateful about that. So that's completely realistic.
It's realistic, and it's a setup for potential character growth that unfortunately we don't get. But
the promise is there.
The promise is there. It's a good start. I feel like there's a lot of good starts in this. Like, the title is good. The setup of this like poverty is really strong. Right. We have a family dynamic that I think is interesting, but none of it's developed. No. That's where the book really falls on its face.
Right. You know, you have 2 separate points in the life of Daniel, the elementary school scenes and the godhood scenes. They both have something of a through line in and of themselves. There's a little bit of weakness in the welding, but taken separately, there are 2 very developed, distinct points in the story.
Yeah, it's almost like there's 2 books here. I feel like this could have been a book about... It could have been a coming-of-age story set in the rural Midwest. Right. With a Bridge to Terabithia kind of vibe and maybe a light supernatural element in the creek. And then there's a story about a kid who becomes God, which is weirdly reminiscent of Empress Theresa.
Weirdly reminiscent, which we will get to in our negatives.
One day we were all praying in a circle in church. Someone was praying about how their really old grandpa got cancer, and they asked God to save him. 2 weeks later, the same person would be there, saying they understood why God let their grandpa die. My question is, if God didn't want him to get cancer, why did he get cancer in the first place? So, what is the point in praying about it? So, Andrew, why don't you tell me about some negatives?
So, the most damning and almost cruel thing I could say about this book is it made me really, really appreciate Empress Theresa. I don't know. There's this... The through line is exactly the same. It's a pseudo Bildungsroman where someone is imbued with alien powers and uses their godlike alien powers to change the world in their image. The operative difference is that Theresa stays humble. Yep. You know, whether or not you subscribe to Catholicism, Theresa always gives credit to the big man upstairs. Theresa is always trying to be as humble as she possibly can. Meanwhile, Daniel literally kills God.
Yeah, Theresa doesn't let power change her. And I want to take this opportunity to rescind a criticism that I made of your work, Norm. That was my bad. I suggested that maybe Empress Theresa should have a villain arc where she flirts with temptation and decides to use her powers for evil. This book, Reaper's Creek, is that, but a book, and it's not good. So maybe that's in the execution, but I think maybe Theresa not having a villain arc was a good decision on your part, Norm. I was wrong on this one, and I apologize. There's some other weird, like, on the level of, like, details, weird similarities between this book and Empress Theresa, like, down to the fact that there's a point where the person discovers their alien powers by having an orb of unidentified origin fly into their body.
It's so... Like, I was reading this and my jaw dropped. I was like, why is this the blueprint for every weird book on the internet?
Yeah, this is like the boys' version of Empress Theresa. Like, it would have, like, a blue cover and, like, some fire trucks on it, whereas Empress Theresa would have, like, a bow and be pink or something.
And the hyperfixation on, like, overly specific numbers too. I mentioned earlier, you know, he kills all of the aliens not in a couple hours, not in a split second. He kills all of the aliens in 14 hours, 57 minutes, and 49 seconds. It's so ridiculously specific. And I thought that was idiosyncratic of Norm, but I guess this is just I'm trying to give it authenticity?
I suspect that this is a sort of misinterpretation of some common writing advice, which is to add concrete detail to things. And I don't know if Norm and Onision heard this somewhere, or if they just kind of absorbed it implicitly by reading other stuff, although I have my doubts about how much either of those people read. I feel like you hear a lot, you know, include details.
Right.
And so they'll be like, oh, I can make this feel super realistic if I'm like, oh, it took me 17 hours to kill these aliens on the dot.
Right.
It's like borrowing authenticity that's not...
Exactly.
It's not anything.
Exactly. And even height is a completely other hyperfixation of Onision's or Daniel's, but like...
Or Greg's.
That was... But every single thing, it was like, he was 5'11", which was weird because I was only 5'9", and I was older than him. Or you know, it was so much detail was given to numbers that mean absolutely nothing to a lay reader.
And I suspect that, like a lot of things in this book, that's a sort of outcropping of Onision's personal hyperfixations.
Sure.
Because as I learned from you before the recording, he's a person who in real life is obsessed with his height. And throughout the book, especially during the childhood sections, he continually repeats the fact that he's taller than other people.
Yes.
And I know now that as a fully grown adult, he's shorter than he would like to be. And so I think he's trying to, like, maybe balance that somehow by being like, well, as a kid, I was much taller than everyone else. So if you think about it, really, I am an alpha male, actually. This book is difficult to offer suggestions about. With a lot of our previous books, I feel like something we've done is found a plot point that we felt like wasn't working super well and tried to like rewrite the book from that point on, or rewrite that arc of the book. But this book is so, and I'll say it frankly, woefully incomplete that you could really rewrite any or all of it and improve it.
I disagree slightly with that. We'll talk a little bit more in the actual suggestions section. I think this is definitely an incomplete work, but I think we can still preserve his vision and be concrete about what needs to change.
I mean, I think we could preserve his vision and still rewrite the whole thing.
That's fair.
I mean, I don't think this book was edited.
I guarantee you it was not. Case in point, there's an episode of The Office where the main character, Michael Scott, is writing this book about a super spy.
Did you just name the main character of The Office as if people don't know his name?
The main character of this obscure TV show.
Yeah, it's really indie.
That's really indie called The Office. Michael Scott writes this book, and they find like the Word document of it, and it's about like Michael Scarn or something. It's clearly him. And then he has like this dumb, dim-witted assistant. And they go through the book and they're reading the book. And at one point, the assistant is referred to as Dwigged, which is one letter off from Michael's real-life assistant, Dwight. And so he had hit Control-H on his word processor and tried to replace all the names, but he misspelled that one instance. So it was obvious that he was clearly just a self-insert with his little assistant in real life. And much to the same point, there is a very key moment where Daniel's mother refers to him as Greg, which Onision is your real name. So it's really interesting.
It's not clear whether, because Greg is spelled correctly, so I don't know if he wrote this part after, and so after he control-H'd or what happened there, but yeah, I don't know, like...
Maybe it's a honeypot for attention. Like, maybe he made it so that podcasters would talk about it and give it traction.
That would imply, like, a level of forethought that I would be so impressed with, honestly. That would be fantastic.
It would be great.
Onision, if you're out there and you got us, like if you totally punked us, like let us know.
Please add us at English Club Podcast
on whatever
on
platform,
Instagram and Twitter,
and we'll give you credit where credit's due.
I'm willing to recognize games so much right now. At dinner, Julia's father had a lot to say about the changes I made to the world, not knowing I played any part of it. He spouted out, "So women have teeth on their crotches now. Daniel?" In the middle of drinking my lemonade, I tried to swallow without a hiccup. Clearing my throat, I replied, "Yes, I thought that would make sense." Her dad looked concerned. "What do you mean?" I replied sincerely. "I mean, men have their swords. Women should have their blades too, right?" Talk about comparisons to Empress Theresa, and talk about my appreciation for Empress Theresa that I've gained from this book. There was this really cool element where Empress Theresa would control Hal through very tactile and understandable representations on a game board like she was the chess master.
Yeah.
This is not present in Reaper's Creek whatsoever. Daniel will simply say, "I modified the code so that vaginas have teeth." Is it different to change vaginas having teeth than it is to fly? Is it different to give parents the ability to know their children's location than it is to give vaginas teeth? What is the relative difficulty? What is the cost? What are the means by which you're doing this? And, I talked about, it was very relatable seeing bad code. I wonder, Onision, if you code at all in your life, because, you could kind of add on to that. It's an interesting phenomenon in software development that people don't understand. It can be difficult in a software to add a button versus create a completely different suite of features just because of the way things are built. You could lean into that and make it palatable to a lay audience. And I just don't think it was quite developed enough.
I've not coded much, but from what I understand, it can sometimes be much harder to go in and change something that's already there or to add a feature to something that already exists than to create something from scratch. Mm-hmm. Simply because if you create it from scratch, you're the author and you understand every bit of it.
Right.
Whereas if you're recoding something, you have to read something that someone's already written.
Right, which is the equivalent of exploring a tomb. And I think if you're going to go for the code analogy, there's just so much you could lean into that I was really disappointed we never got to see.
I mean, he could have a conversation with Cull about, why did you code this way or something? And it could be funny. It could be funny.
It could be great.
Because there's attempts at humor in this book, so obviously comedy is part of your vision.
Sure.
So there's room for that, I think. But we don't get it. I don't even think Cull speaks.
Cull speaks.
Does he speak, in quotations?
Oh, maybe he doesn't speak in quotations. Maybe he does, but he...
he is summarized to have talked.
Right.
But it's
it's very fleeting.
It's not like an attributed quote, it's like a summary.
Right.
As far as I remember.
About Cull in general, the switch from Bildungsroman to I am God and I'm going to murder everyone who disagrees with me is incredibly quick. Worse than Empress Theresa, which we griped about.
Yep.
I honestly, there was the plane, and then he murders the special ed kid, and then he commits alien genocide, and then the second half of the book just flies by you beyond your ability to comprehend it.
I think the real turning point is when he stabs the alien kid on the plane.
Right.
And then some stuff happens, and then Julia gets assassinated.
Yes!
He brings her back to life, and that feels like a second turning point to him truly unlocking his powers.
Sent the I don't even remember who sent the assassins.
I think I think it was like a chain of command thing where somebody hired somebody to hire somebody.
But who was
the
it was an alien. It was an alien.
I think
so an alien hired a human who hired a human who hired a human.
Yeah, I think so.
It's.
I mean, what does it matter really? Aren't we all aliens? I mean, we all are in space.
I don't want to gripe too much about this because I'm as guilty as this as anyone else. But there's it was very funny to me seeing the Gnostic elements of this. The idea that there was a good female god who was supplicated by an imperfect male god who considered himself the supreme god of the universe. It's very much monolinguist Protestant white guy reads one Gnostic text and completely changes his worldview and applies it to everything, which I am completely guilty of. That is literally my entire life story, but it was still like, come on, dude, you could be at least a little bit more nuanced with this.
There is this like sort of warped asceticism that I feel like comes across as a major theme, the idea that the material world is inherently evil and flawed and needs to be fixed. Because destroying it isn't an option, because he makes it clear that he doesn't want to destroy it, because he likes to indulge in the, I don't know, carnal pleasures. But apparently the material world is deeply and fundamentally flawed and needs to be fixed because it can't be destroyed ethically.
Right.
And
because he loves Julia.
That feels Gnostic. It feels like there's a demiurge.
It was interesting for me to read, and I was like Greg, come on, man, like. And then the body has to kill 3 different versions of God, and I was like, oh, where'd you get that idea, Greg? Where'd that come from?
Yeah, and one of the versions of God is literally like a beaming with white light in a robe, big beard kind of guy. So yeah, I don't know. That feels like it might be drawn from other sources. Mm-hmm. One of the forms of God we never even see, the body kills it off screen.
Yeah. There's a couple off-screen body kills. There's
What's the body's body count?
Oh, that's something that we need to talk about. Okay, not only did the body make fun of Daniel for this, but why did Daniel, the avatar of Onision, go on record saying that he found his own mother sexually attractive?
And that's not, to be clear, that's not his human mother, who it turns out is not his actual mom, because his actual mom, and the reason he has these powers, is the sister goddess. She's the reason he has... and she's the reason he has the black stone in his head, which is from whence he derives his power. And this is clarified in a single sentence in like one of the last chapters with 0 fanfare. And in a previous chapter, he had said that he found this deity to be sexually attractive. So yeah, why did he feel the need to bring that up? I'm not sure. It's so bizarre, especially in a book that's so explicitly a self-insert. Like, why would you show your hand like that?
I resist the earthly urges of Twitter, but it does feel like a self-report,
you're afraid
as they would say.
You're afraid of all the woke moralists. Daniel really went up to God and he was like, we'll see who cancels who. And then he killed him.
On a brass tacks level, and I struggle with this because this is also stylistic, it feels too poetic. He tries to be a little bit too deep. He'll say, when he wakes up, he's like, something burst between the darkness created by my own eyes. And it's just, you can just say that he wakes up and it would feel just as, if not more, natural.
And in terms of actual content, like, the first half of the book is split between chapters opening with him waking up.
Yes!
And chapters opening with him waking up by being abducted by aliens.
Right!
So, like, he wakes up, like, 7 times at the beginning of this book, which is, I mean, it's annoying to read, honestly.
A comparable amount of times he will go to sleep and he'll talk about how comforting the heater is, or... Yeah, it's cute, but it's so redundant. There's multiple different times that he mentions
For a book this short, and it's almost a pamphlet, it repeats itself way too much.
Yeah, the redundancy issue is immense and would really benefit from some good editing.
Yeah, this book definitely needs an editor because it didn't have one, and I don't know if that's just the result of Onision's own ego, like not being
it has to be.
Like I can imagine that he's not able to let someone touch this because I mean, when you start a book off by saying this is a representation of my most nuanced and authentic self, you set yourself up to be offended when somebody suggests a change.
Exactly.
He's putting too much of himself in this, and I think it's too raw.
Yeah, there was something I was reading recently, a uniquely personal vision that represents nothing but the writer's own genius is not intelligible as literature. There's almost too much of Onision in this for it to be easily edited without, some severe mental strife on Onision's part, at least.
I can't believe you quoted that verbatim without looking at the book. That's so impressive, and I'm impressed by it.
I just have an eidetic memory. What can I say?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It sets itself up to be uneditable.
But I don't think it's beyond saving. There's some interesting stuff here, and the background that Daniel comes from, and that gritty, raw, growing up in poverty feeling, is something that should be delved into. And I like a lot of what was promised.
And I agree that it's definitely not beyond saving. Anybody that has been in an intro-level fiction writing class has read something like this, where there's too much of the author's real life in it for it to be effective fiction. Usually it's not so psychosexual.
Yeah.
But it happens. You get these kinds of stories, and they're fixable with some editing, but it starts with overcoming your own ego as a writer.
Right.
To be able to fix something like this.
Exactly.
In addition to poverty, another thing that this book addresses that I think is worth commenting on is the representations of the cycle of abuse. Because Daniel has a sexually abusive father and stepfather, and then he himself is groomed by a legally adult woman.
Right.
And then he kind of becomes the abuser. I mean, he's not technically a groomer because she's legal.
Right.
But he becomes like an adult man who's much older than this girl so that they can continue to have sex.
By changing the code of the universe.
But now the power dynamic has flipped and he has all the power because he's the one giving her the god powers. He's the one changing himself to be an adult.
Right.
And I think a more self-aware book would be able to do something with that, where he's eventually dethroned or criticized for doing that. Because as a child, he's a victim, plain and simple. He can't be responsible for what happens to him at the hands of Julia.
Exactly.
But as an adult, he needs to have the agency to realize what he's doing is wrong.
Yeah. There's a disturbing lack of development in Daniel that I think was something that the book was almost begging for to begin with, that is completely undelivered upon.
He kind of gets bigged. You know the movie Big?
Yeah.
Where he becomes an adult, but mentally he's still a child.
That's literally what happens.
That is what happens. But the weird thing is, the difference is that Daniel feels almost like an adult from the beginning because he's not written effectively like a child.
Right.
So when there's no change between him becoming a child and adult, it's not very shocking because his tone didn't need to change. Yeah. Because he's not a convincing child character to begin with.
No. But, I mean, to be fair, you do kind of get the sense that this is a kind of a retrospective.
Sure.
But I really wish there was more of a sense of development.
And there's room for it. I mean, it's only 120 pages and a lot of it's redundant.
Yeah. Just a little bit of trimming and a little bit of expanding in, important meaty areas would be enough.
Yeah, this book really needs to be accordioned. Like, I feel like it needs to be compressed and then expanded. And It needs to be pruned like a bonsai tree. Like, there's a lot that needs to be cut off initially and then it can regrow in the right shape. That's too good for analogies for you out there. All you out there in radio world.
I wish I could tell you I saw nothing, because I would rather this all have been simply a twisted and life-haunting dream. I don't want to talk about this right now. Alright, so we have laid out all the positives and negatives about Raper's Creek by Onision. Now, like we've said, I think there is room for salvation here. There is something that's worth preserving, like there is in any work of literature. Joshua, do you want to talk a little bit about what your suggestions are for moving forward?
I'm skeptical of how there can be salvation now that God has been thrice killed. But we can work on it. Okay. We'll do our best.
We'll do it as best as we can without God.
Sorry, Norm, that you had to hear that.
Yeah.
So my first suggestion is there's a couple of places where Daniel speaks directly to the reader. He says, I don't want to talk about this right now at the end of one chapter as a way of brushing off some uncomfortable truth. And there's other similar instances throughout the book, which implies that Daniel is telling the story to someone. And I was told in an early fiction workshop that anytime a story is in the first person, you need to consider why the story is being told and to whom. And I think that's actually bad advice, because sometimes stories are just in the first person, and that's okay.
Yeah.
However, if you break the fourth wall and the main character implies that they are talking to someone, then you need to explain who, and you need to explain the occasion. Because it opens the world up to being, like, broader.
Right.
And it raises questions that need answering.
I struggle a little bit with that, mostly because I hate frame stories. You're describing something that I view as kind of an imposition. Mm-hmm. You know, Daniel is talking to us. Daniel is speaking to the reader. To contextualize that further will just impose further limitations on the narrative that he's telling. So take Elizabeth Gilbert's City of Girls. The idea is someone has written the narrator a letter saying, hey, I think you've had an illicit relationship with my father. I just want to know who you were to my father. Imagine you, the reader, write that letter to this woman, and you receive a 500-page manuscript detailing this girl's entire development from 18 years old to all of her sexual escapades in New York City to where she meets your father in the last 20 pages. To concretely state, I am Daniel, and this is my letter to you. This is my diary. This is my manifesto. I worry that will be too much of a limitation on the way that the story is told.
You're worried that Onision's Reaper's Creek is going to get too heavy-handed on us with its storytelling, is what you're saying?
Yes! Unironically, I am worried that the storytelling will be too heavy-handed because I accidentally listened to This Is Why I Hate You, which is framed as a journal. And then at the very end, spoiler alert, the narrator dies. And then there's another chapter where they have to explain how the journal was continued, and it's some jerry-rigged, crowbarred in, oh, my girlfriend wrote it in for me because she knew me so well. Like, I don't want that. I want to focus on all the good parts of this struggling, young, troubled child with a hero complex who wants to make the world a better place.
Well, my point wasn't necessarily like frame stories are good versus frame stories are bad. More that if Onision if it's in his vision to make this a frame story, he needs to commit. I kind of agree with you that he probably shouldn't, because I don't think it's adding anything. But if he's going to, he needs to explain why the story is being told, when it's being told, and to whom. And it doesn't have to be directly to us, the reader. And I understand your point about if he's telling this story, it's kind of weird that no one is interjecting, and like the interlocutor isn't saying like, hey, that's fucked up that you were groomed, or something. And that can be done effectively. So there's this really good young adult book that I read a couple of years back by Adam Gidwitz, and it's called The Inquisitor's Tale, and it's set in medieval France.
Okay.
And it's a frame story from multiple perspectives, but every once in a while, the characters in the bar where the story is told will interject and be like, wait, I saw this part of the story from a different perspective. That's not how it happened.
I see.
So we could have something like that where other characters who are there are commenting on it. Now, I'm not saying we should, because I don't think that would work for this story.
No.
But if Onision wants that, it can be done with the proper execution.
So what's the alternative? Third person?
The alternative is keep it first person, but just cut the parts where he addresses the reader.
I see.
Because for me, that's what's raising a question about, like, who's this story being told to?
Okay.
And if it's the reader, then what's the reader's role in the story?
Right.
Because just talking directly to the reader is very, like, I don't know, 17th century.
Yeah.
And it's annoying.
Right.
It feels outmoded. It could even be a Wuthering Heights situation where the story is being told by what's-her-face, the maid or whatever.
And but that's outdated too.
That's outdated. That's for sure outdated. But like, at least the guy that she's telling it to does pop in like twice.
Right. Imagine David being the storyteller here, the best friend that he abandons halfway through and doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I mean,
it could be interesting. That's
kind of how Adam Gidwitz's book works, because a lot of the characters only witnessed like a very small fragment of the story, and so then somebody else jumps in like, oh well, I saw them after they left the castle.
And we talked about this a little bit in Empress Theresa too, how iconic characters or godlike characters are not interesting save for the humans that observe them. You get the classic Sherlock Watson dynamic.
Yeah.
If Sherlock Holmes were narrating in first person, it would not be half as interesting as Watson observing this character.
This is actually kind of demonstrable because there's some Sherlock Holmes stories that are just him standing in a room explaining how he solved a mystery that he's already solved. One of my favorite examples of this is the Red-Headed League, where he's basically already solved the mystery of the Red-Headed League, which is basically this pyramid scheme involving recruiting people who have red hair. And he's just standing in the room for 10 pages explaining how he solved it, and like, he's already done it, so hearing how he did it isn't interesting, because we didn't see the setup.
Right.
And it's not actually actively occurring anymore.
Exactly. But I think another problem with this entire thing is the incredibly breakneck ramping of the stakes, which catapults Daniel unexpectedly into the realm of iconic godlike character. Daniel doesn't start having solved the entire mystery right before your very eyes before anything ever happened. Daniel starts as an elementary school child. And I just wonder if we could shave off the elementary school parts so it's sooner that he becomes a god, or if we reduce the amount of a god that he is and leave him at like I can fly and I can kill people, but I can't rewrite the code of the universe. There needs to be some semblance of balance so that jump in the 50% mark isn't as enormous and puts us at a position where the way that we tell the story jeopardizes the effectiveness of the story.
I can actually tell you where the story needs to begin because I made a note of it, because I had a similar thought. It's on page 27 when he finds the first human body in the creek.
Ooh.
That is the inciting incident.
That's just where Paper Towns begins, where they find the body.
No. No.
Isn't it? I thought it was.
I haven't read it. Yeah, the inciting incident is really on page 27 when he finds the first human body in the creek. So that, and the book, like I said, is 120 pages long, so that's a fifth of it.
Right.
That you could shave off before that. No, a sixth of it. That's how math works.
I wouldn't know.
You mentioned the book moving at a breakneck pace, and that's not a problem that I feel like is unique to the second half. There's a lot of plot points that get mentioned in a sentence, and then are not treated with any gravity, and then immediately move on.
I was willing to forgive it more in the first half, I'd say, because of the way it was presented to us as a Bildungsroman. You know, those are usually more picaresque, as you would say.
I would never say that word.
Well, there were more vignettes of a simpler time, which I was willing to tolerate to an extent. You know, he had a bully, he had a best friend, he defended another bullied kid. I don't need that to be treated as though it was it's Schindler's List. Sure. I can tolerate a little bit of episodicness.
The stakes of the world aren't his friendship with this bullied kid.
Right.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
But
those have to, each of those stories then leads to end in some kind of lesson that leaves him changed and better, or worsened. But he stays the same. He has a hero complex at the beginning. He has a hero complex at the end.
Right.
That's not really challenged in any meaningful way. He doesn't grow.
And it's hard to make characters that fundamentally flawed iconic the way that Greg is trying to do.
Yeah. There's sort of a Kafka-esque aspect to this novel, by which I mean there are very long paragraphs that flip-flop between two different people speaking and description without starting new paragraphs, which is a thing that Kafka did because he's old-timey,
right?
And because they didn't want to change too much about the way his work looked when it got published after he died. And so it's a pain to read a lot of his stuff because it's just like a 22-page single paragraph.
Right.
And this book has that same issue. Granted, the paragraphs are shorter, but it is very confusing when Greg, Julie, and Mom all speak in the same contiguous paragraph and there's like a big section of description in the middle of it. It's hard to keep track of what's going on. And there's 1 or 2 times where it's hard to tell who's talking, and that really changes the meaning of the story. And it's such an easy fix, too. Like, just hit the enter and the tab key.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is there's a lot of... I don't want to talk about it too much because it's boring and brass tack stuff. There's a lot of basic formatting, grammar, and spelling issues that need to be addressed. Talk about needing an editor. Especially it's as it is rather than possessive it was used ad nauseum, and I would do anything to have had another pair of eyes on this.
Yeah.
Even just for the bare minimum grammar and spelling changes.
You're right that these things, like, conceptually don't really matter, but they add up.
Right.
The awkward formatting, the grammatical mistakes, the spelling issues, the names being misspelled and changing. Like, these compound. And so one of them on their own would be a big issue, but all of them together create something that, like, at times can be a real slog.
And it's just...
And they're so fixable.
They're so fixable, but it's also so tied to ego. Like, I imagine it, the very idea of this, Greg, is making you froth at the mouth.
Yeah.
Because this is you put yourself in this. This isn't a story, this is you. So by saying this, you almost certainly feel like you are being attacked.
Yeah.
And that's inevitable with the kind of story that you told, but it doesn't change the fact that it '(s) is not possessive of it.
That's so true, it's not.
It's not. It's just not.
And that's it '(s).
Society was like a book full of images, saturated with gore and chaos. I could stomach the cover, but the moment I tried to open a single page, I felt defeated. Hopeless.
We live in a society.
Bottom text. Jesus Christ. Well, Onision, we have reached the end of Reaper's Creek. I hope that we gave you something to work on for your future books, because I do see a lot of potential in this. The fact of the matter is, things like Reaper's Creek and Empress Theresa, as much as we love to make fun of them, they have staying power, because they appeal to some very basic desire for godhood and power that I think anyone can relate to.
And more universally, maybe, like the ability to just change something with a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who hasn't wished for that? I mean, that's literally what the idea of a wish is.
Right, yeah, literally. So you're dealing with an evergreen topic, and I think that there's a lot more you can milk out of this. Were we disappointed in Reaper's Creek? Sure, but that doesn't mean that we think that it's unredeemable or that this line of thought should be abandoned.
No, and it might have a very promising future in the dental industry as something that knocks people out before wisdom tooth surgery.
Well, I'll leave you with this. Onision, Greg.
He has many names.
You have so many names. God loves you. I'm praying for you. And I hope that you will find God one day.
And I hope that when you do, you don't kill him.
This has been another episode of the English Club podcast. I've been your host, Andrew.
Are we not going to talk about Final Fantasy?
We're not going to talk about Final Fantasy. We're not going to talk about Metal Gear Solid. Goodbye. Say your sign off, Joshua.
And I am Greg/Daniel.
And we will see you guys around campus. The alien was waiting for me. I felt I had come to know him almost as well as a human can know in... What? Okay.
Yeah.
I felt I had come to know him almost as well as a human can know an alien they're being abducted by. Once the fear subsided, I started to notice the creature... I don't want to read all that. That's actually kind of boring. I don't want to talk about that.